Hey everyone, and welcome back to Innovation Unplugged, the show where we spotlight the startups and the leaders reshaping the way we build, deploy, and scale technology. I'm Jim Brismitzis, and today we're joined by my good friend Prakash over at Defang, who's taking the complexity out of cloud deployments. In a world where managing infrastructure often feels like an obstacle course of tools and configs and platform lock-in, Defang offers something radically simple. Deploy any app to your favorite cloud with a single command line. It's a cross-cloud, developer-first, and AI-enabled future with Defang where it actually makes sense. And today we'll hear from their founder, Prakash, on how they're scaling, where they're going next, and why developers are raving about the experience. Prakash, thank you again for joining us today on Innovation Unplugged. I'll take a moment to have you introduce yourself and a little bit about Defang.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. Thanks for having me. Yeah, just a quick background about myself. It's now coming up on 30 years in the tech industry. Long time at Microsoft, about 15 years building what used to be called at that time server and tools, and the precursor to the cloud, the early days of Azure. And then did a startup that was eventually acquired by Workday, one of the born in the cloud application companies. And then spent some time at AWS running a couple of their services as well. So a lot of time both building and operating cloud platforms, as well as being on the other side, being a customer using these cloud platforms. And that's the experience that we bring, me and my co-founder as well, who has similar experiences that we bring to Defang.
What's fun, just to go off tangent for a moment, Prakash, is that our lives have sort of intertwined and crossed several times. We were both at Microsoft around the same time, as they used to call server and tools, or SDV. And as you know, I was at PeopleSoft, and the founder of PeopleSoft, after the acquisition from Oracle, started Workday. And so It's fun to see our paths cross in the many years that we've both been in the industry.
Yes.
So given that experience that you've been in the industry as long as you have, and this is usually the case for most founders, there's a problem they see, a nagging problem that they just need to go and solve. So I like to ask this of all of our guests: is what was the inspiration for you behind Defang?
Yeah, and like I said, Defang really comes out of those previous experiences that we've had on both sides of the cloud, both building the platform and using it. Just to speak to the user experience, right, or the customer experience. Obviously, cloud is great. The feature set, the global scale, the pay-as-you-go business model, all of that, companies around the world are experiencing the benefits. What is still a struggle is the complexity, right? And we experienced that when we were a small startup where we were on AWS at that time, and there are just so many options. And we were, I hope, experts at building the application that we were trying to build, but we were not by any means experts on all the different services in AWS and how to configure them and how to secure them, and how to make them scalable, cost effective. So that was a struggle, and as many startups do, we hired a DevOps engineer, but what we figured out was that was kind of a not very satisfactory solution, right? One person cannot be the expert in all of the platform. It also introduces a single point of failure. But post-acquisition by Workday, Workday is obviously a multi-tens of billions of dollars of market cap company, lots of resources. But what we realized is this is also a big company problem. And when I was leading the joint engineering team for the identity product at Workday, we had kind of a dual mandate. One is to go build the identity product on top of AWS. But also, Workday actually predated AWS. So they were on their own infrastructure, and they wanted to move to a public cloud. And so our second mandate was to go figure out how, to build applications at scale on AWS, and then take that knowledge to the rest of Workday. And what we realized is it's just as much of a challenge in a big company as it is in a small startup. And that was kind of the, realization that this is a problem across the industry, complexity.
So if I were to put a cynical hat on for a moment, I'm sure you get this question a lot. But there's lots of DevOps tools in the marketplace today, and they're PaaS platforms and such.
Yeah.
when you have seen some resistance or pushback, like, okay, but there's all these other things.
Yeah.
Let's focus on what makes Defang unique, and
Yeah.
why those platforms perhaps weren't even solving the harder problems that you guys took on as a challenge.
Yeah. And if you look across the industry, there's kind of two types of approaches towards this complexity problem. One is a platform approach, which is to say, oh, these hyperscalers, they're great in terms of feature set and scale and so on, but they're complex. So let me offer you a simpler platform on top of one of the hyperscalers. So Vercel or Netlify, Fly.io, these type of companies and platforms fall into that category. And clearly they have established a role for themselves. The other type of solution, so the platform approach is, it's great to get started, but as a layer on top of the public clouds, like sometimes the surface area is limited, right? And so what if I need a feature that's in the underlying cloud, but it's not exposed by these platform layers on top of the hyperscalers? I'm kind of stuck. Plus, as a matter of economics, obviously these platforms are adding some value, so they have to make some margin on top of what the underlying platform offers. So there's some trade-offs there. The other approach to the complexity is like infrastructure as code type of tools. We've had Terraform and Pulumi and others, and they're all great as well in what they solve. What they solve, though, is taking ClickOps, clicking around in dashboards and doing your DevOps that way, and turning that into repeatable, scriptable, programmable processes, which is great. Obviously, we need that. But what it doesn't solve is I still have to know which services that I want to use, how to use them, how to make them scalable and secure. If I don't know that, I'm going to write, suboptimal infrastructure as code, and then it's going to result in some problems. And now it's repeatable. So that was kind of the landscape. So the approach we took is, what if we could bring the simplicity of that first class of solution, like the Vercels of the world, but bring it to the hyperscalers so that the developer has that experience, that wow experience. So this is just as simple, but I'm running actually on the cloud that I want to run on, or where I have credits, where there's scale and feature set and global reach and all of that good stuff, right? So we try to bring the best of both worlds, and we can talk about how we do that. Yeah.
Well, actually, I was going to go there, Prakash, which is run me through a day in the life experience of a DevOps engineer or any developer who's using DevOps. What does that experience look like? It sounds great, click once, run anywhere. But I'd love to get your perspective on, the
we
user
don't do clicks, but single command, run anywhere.
That's right.
The inspiration we took was the local, like laptop or desktop experience that developers have every day. Millions of developers are using Docker, for example, and in particular, they are using Compose, which is a specification that Docker put out into the industry, and it's now an industry standard. And Compose is really a specification of a multi-container, multi-service application. So let's say you have an application, it has a front end, it has a back end, it has a database, it has a queue. Nowadays, most applications also have some LLM functionality. So maybe it has an embedding model and a chat model. And it lives at a particular URL. This you can describe in about, less than 100 lines of Compose, right? You can say either build from source, or here's the binary for each service. And actually, most of the editors nowadays, whether it's VS Code or Cursor or Windsurf or any of these, Claude, will actually help you generate that Compose file as well, because it's an industry standard. And what developers have been able to do for a long time is spin this up locally on their laptop or desktop, say Docker Compose up, and all the services come up and you can debug and iterate very quickly. That's called the inner loop. The problem is when you want to go to the cloud, right? So now you have to know about all these other concepts, right? Networking and which services for compute and storage and database and all of that stuff, and how to configure them. And we were like, why can't cloud be just as simple? So what we've basically provided is Defang, which takes the same actual compose file that you're using locally already, which is cloud agnostic. And then we can, if you say Defang compose up instead of Docker compose up, and you pass in your parameters like dash dash provider equals AWS, and here's my account, we can deploy it right into that account. And not just as a toy deployment. A lot of times these tools are just toys where you put everything in a VM and shove it into the cloud. But that's not what we do, right? We actually map it to the native services for compute, for networking, for storage, for database, for even for LLMs like Bedrock, so that it is actually a scalable production quality deployment done according to the best practices of that cloud. So for example, if it's AWS has a framework called well-architected framework, which is how they assess whether a deployment follows their best practices. The reality is most customer applications on AWS will not pass what's called a wafered well-architected framework review because of the complexity.
Yeah.
So our deployments are out of the box wafer compliant because we've done the hard work once of making sure the configurations we emit are compliant with that well-architected framework. And similarly for other platforms, we support AWS, Google, DigitalOcean. We're working on other platforms. So each platform, we make the deployment the best that it can be on that platform.
Sort of a side question. And you remember this from your time at AWS and Microsoft. The cloud vendors are constantly releasing new features, new specifications. How do you all stay ahead of those changes and adopt those best practices as those features are being deployed? Or is that outside of the scope of Defang?
Well, it is definitely within scope for, obviously there's a lot of surface area and some of it might be cloud specific and maybe kind of niche. But when something, becomes the norm in terms of the services you use to build your application, inevitably what happens is all the public clouds, the hyperscalers have some version of that. So, for example, you take databases, so Postgres, MongoDB, these are all offered across all the different cloud platforms. However, they are not identical. And so sometimes you have to kind of, make sure that that's the work that Defang does is make your deployment seamless, regardless of whichever cloud it's going to. Another example is LLM. So obviously, a lot of applications nowadays use LLMs. If you're on AWS, you would like to use Bedrock. If you're on GCP, you would like to use Vertex AI. And we do that. We set it up, configure it, hook it up so that your application actually does not have to change. Whatever source code you have runs locally, runs in AWS, and would also run on GCP. So you're really, the tagline of develop once, deploy anywhere, that's what we strive to live up to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I believe there's a little bit of AI in Defang's platform as well. I mean, there's AI really now in most corners of the software world today. But I think you guys are taking an interesting approach to the use of AI in Defang. I'd love to have you maybe explain more.
Yeah, and actually, there's kind of two aspects. One is how do we use AI? And then what type of AI applications is Defang being used for? And I think both are interesting. Obviously we use AI in a lot of different ways. So for example, we have an MCP server, so you can download our CLI, or if you want to consume Defang or interact with Defang from right within your favorite IDE, whether it's Visual Studio or Claude or Cursor or any of those, you can install our MCP server. And then these IDEs know how, what tools we expose. So literally from within your IDE, you can say something like, deploy this application now to my AWS account. And it all seems seamless and magical. That's one way into which we integrate. Other ways in which we use AI, for example, if something goes wrong with your deployment, right? It's very difficult a lot of times to figure out what went wrong. Is there something wrong in the application that you wrote? Is it something that's wrong in the underlying cloud platform and how you've tried to use it? Is it something wrong in Defang and how we're doing the mapping? And so we use AI to help you debug those. So typically, if you have a deployment failure, our debugger will kick in and say, hey, do you want me to help you identify the problem? And if you say yes, it's like, okay, here's 3 reasons why this might be failing, and here's how to fix this, right? And you can go ahead and do that. Another way we're using AI recently, for example, is we offer migration from Heroku. Heroku is obviously a very popular platform, has been, but a lot of customers are wanting to move their workloads to the cloud that they have now standardized on. And so we have like literally a 2-command migration from Heroku to your favorite cloud. One is to suck in your Heroku application, generate a compose file out of it, in which step that we do use AI to do that translation. And then you deploy it as usual. But it's also important, I think, to touch on like where we don't use AI, right? There's obviously a lot of hype and a lot of we have to be careful to recognize the limits of what AI can do today. So in our core translation of a composed file to a target, whether that's AWS or Google or any other, that is a deterministic, predictable, 100% repeatable process without the probabilistic nature of AI in there. And that's very important in DevOps, because if you lose the customer once because you left a security hole open or something like that, could be devastating to that relationship. So we want to make sure that everything is 100% predictable. So that's kind of how we use AI. And I can talk about also how customers, what AI apps customers are building. But let me pause there.
No, actually, I was going to go there. So Defang has been in public use now for a while. You've got, 30% growth month over month is what you and I chatted about at one point. I think you've got several thousands of users on it today. So let's go there. And I'd love for you to maybe touch on, there's so many personas in developers, from solo developers to startups to, enterprise devs and students and everything else. So maybe you can touch a little bit about your current market traction, and then where you're seeing some early success from an audience perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have close to 10,000 users now using Defang as a deployment tool. And when we started, a lot of the users were using Defang to deploy like Python applications or Next.js applications. And that's still true, right? Especially like in the hackathon environment, Defang is a very popular tool because they can not only build their application during the hackathon, but actually deploy it, which oftentimes the complexity of the cloud platforms makes it, a little bit daunting otherwise to be able to do that. But the recent trend is agentic applications, right? And everybody, especially a lot of startups, are building agentic applications. And this feels like the start of a new era, just like we had client server and then SaaS. Mm-hmm. Now we're transitioning to this agentic era. And just like with each of those transitions, everything is up for grabs, from all the sort of legacy applications being reinvented and reimagined to the business model, how you're going to charge for your agentic applications, but also in our case, deployment, how you're going to deploy.
And where it deploys.
Where it deploys, exactly, right? So I think we were talking earlier.
Point, just because as you and I were chatting earlier, sorry to cut you off, but the whole promise of AI is data. And the data is largely going to be out on the edges, not necessarily in a hyperscaler's data center or a private cloud that an enterprise runs or what have you. And so that is, for you, that's a very huge opportunity, I think.
It absolutely is. So, when I started my career, it was the client server era, right? And SAP, PeopleSoft, you mentioned, those were the iconic apps. And if you wanted to run those as a customer, you had to not only license the application, you had to stand up the hardware and the operating system, the databases, and then the application, run everything yourself. Total control, but very complex.
Yeah.
And to solve that complexity, after a while, SaaS came along and cloud came along. And so we had applications like Workday and Salesforce, where those vendors then took over all that complexity. Mm-hmm. And as a customer, all you needed was a credit card and a browser. Mm-hmm. So you won on the simplicity. However, you did give up something, which is your data is now locked into these applications. And sometimes there's like ambiguity or, about what you can do with your own data, what the provider can do with your data, and so on. Mm-hmm. So now as we're transitioning to the, agentic era, customers have wisened up, I would say, a little bit about the importance of their data. And especially when they're evaluating agents from startups, for example, they don't want to send their data to some external environment where the agent runs, where they will lose control of that data. They don't know what happens to it. Is an AI being trained on that? And sometimes, actually, a lot of times, customers cannot send their data. They have set up their compliance, whether it's SOC 2 or any other, in a particular environment. Data cannot move out of that. And so what they're saying to these startups and ISVs is, I love your agent, but please bring it to where I have my data. I'm not sending you my data. So now, if you imagine you're that ISV or you're that startup, you're not running one SaaS environment where you have multi-tenancy and you have 10 different customers or 100 or 1,000. You're having to deploy into various different environments where your customers are. And some of them might be on AWS, some of them are on Azure, some of them are on GCP or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So
GX.
Having repeatable, high-quality deployments of your agents into different environments is becoming a critical requirement. Yeah. And that's exactly what we do. We take your app, you develop it once, and then we can produce a high-quality deployment in different environments.
Absolutely. This is very similar to a conversation I just recently had with some former colleagues at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Where the future enterprise is not one gigantic agentic AI agent.
Yes.
It's going to be hundreds, thousands, maybe, right?
Yeah.
All specifically trained on a particular task or a series of tasks, as part of a bigger business process, and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating place where we're heading to.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to say, like, one example I'll say is, like, oftentimes in meetings, everybody has their note taker application, right? Uh-huh. And so, that's great, helps you simplify your life. But do you actually know where that information is going, right? If you're in a team meeting discussing some confidential stuff or with a customer, where's that note taker taking that information? So we actually use a note taker from an ISV that is actually our customer as well. So we know that in that case, that note taker is running in my AWS account and no data is going out of that. So that's, I think, a great example of agents running in your own environment because the data is so mission critical.
So as we come to a close, Prakash, it'd be great to end on, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like, Defang? I mean, you start off on an amazing mission, you fulfilled that mission, and then AI is really taken off. Clearly, there's lots of change that AI is disrupting in the software world. What could listeners expect to see from Defang over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think more innovation towards this agentic wave. I think we're just in the early innings of agentic applications, and there's so much that the hyperscalers are doing in this, but there's also the ISVs, the startups, they're still in this early in this journey. And so every day, it seems like almost every day, or at least every week or month, there's new agentic frameworks, Crew AI, LangGraph, AutoGen, now Mastra. So people are building apps with all of these frameworks, and they all work great. Defang can deploy any of them to any environment you choose. So more frameworks. As I mentioned, we're adding more cloud support so that you really are develop once, deploy anywhere. There's customers obviously asking for all the hyperscalers, but there's also growing trend towards sovereign clouds, for example, in different countries. And they will have to provide some kind of a platform as a service layer. But if they do, typically it's something based on open source software, and we can provide mappings to those platforms as well. So I think it's fulfilling that mission of develop once to really deploy anywhere.
Yeah. Even more so now than, as we talked about, early days of where things are going. I think the future opportunity for Defang is very much still ahead. There's lots of change in the marketplace and a lot of this value they bring to the market. Well, awesome. Prakash, thank you so much for taking some time and enjoying the nice sunny weather that we have here in Seattle, that you have in Vancouver. It's that time of the year today. Well, I guess this is a good time for us to wrap up our episode with Prakash from Defang. From AI-powered deployments to cross-cloud freedom, Defang is taking the friction out of modern infrastructure and putting control back into the hands of developers, as we just heard. Whether you're a solo builder or managing large-scale cloud apps, this is the platform worth exploring. I encourage you to go check out their website at defang.io to learn more, maybe even sign up for some test accounts as well. Be sure to check them out and stay tuned for what's next. Don't forget to subscribe to Innovation Unplugged, our show. We continue bringing great speakers and great guests like Prakash to every one of our episodes. Leave us a review and please share this episode with anyone working on cloud, DevOps, or developer experiences. Until next time, keep innovating and stay unplugged. Thanks again, Prakash.
Thank you, Jim. It was great.